Hey guys, Matthew. In today's video, I'm going to be bringing you guys essentially an update on some testing that I've been doing in regards to all the different skill gems. Because a lot of people have been asking me why I've winter, right? Why not this? Why not that skill? Why not that one? Right? So I basically decided to pretty much test them all, and I'll be giving you guys essentially my thoughts on and my experience on which one of the skills were most comparable to Winter, and essentially the changes that you would need to do on the build in order to make those specific skills work as best as possible. Because not every single skill can simply just be plugged in and it's going to be doing the same amount of damage, or everything else is going to be the same. So in some cases we need to change a couple things. So now, if you've paid attention to the PoE whatsoever, you'll see that the PoE for this build has pretty much only generic minor nodes as well as defensive nodes, and then of course a lot of travel nodes. There is not a single cold specific node on the entirety of the tree. Now what this means is this allows us to essentially just kind of use whatever skill we want, and all things equal, we can see how each of the skills perform against each other. So that's essentially what I did. So I'm going to basically tell you guys all about the ones that I did test and the changes to make them work at the best. So Frostbomb is an F tier. It's the worst of the worst, and the reason for that is because it has a cooldown. So you actually can't use it. So it's like it gets an F tier, but it actually really gets disqualified for the fact that it can't really be used. Now you'll see a bit of a recurring theme for the next tier, which is like the D tier, and essentially it's either physical converted skills, and yes, when I tested the physical conversion skills, I made sure that I was completely converted through like either the cold conversion, the fire conversion, the lightning, etc. Right? So I made sure that I was completely converted on these skills. Now the reason these skills felt so bad is because I'm not scaling any physical damage. I'm not scaling any physicals extra. Right? The best way to scale a physical skill is to use physicals extra, such as, for example, utilizing like hatred as an aura is like one of the best ways to scale physical spells once you actually convert them into cold. But because I wasn't doing that, because of course that would require me to change the PoE and to basically change the build into a build which is no longer a generic minor PoE, then they basically just were not very good. Another recurring theme in terms of the skills that basically did not do very well is that they are not projectiles, right? So we weren't able to abuse the Sniper's Mark and the Flame Wall tech. So Sniper's Mark is extremely strong curse, and Flame Wall gives us about 10% damage when projectiles go through it. So it's very, very strong. We're not able to abuse that on non-projectile skills. So instead, I used Punishment as the curse to actually try to replace it, but it was nowhere near as good. So in that tier, we had Glacial Cascade, which was actually really bad. Storm Call, which, I mean, everybody would have guessed that that was going to happen, right? Storm Call is not exactly supposed to be played on a minor. There's a delay on it. It's a bit clunky. Now, the reason why Glacial Cascade was so bad is because of the AoE, right? It does more damage as you get through the later waves. Like the first wave doesn't do much damage, so you'd have to aim it literally across the map, given how much actual range this skill actually has. So that's why Glacial Cascade was doing very poorly, on top of the fact that, of course, it's a physical spell, so it doesn't scale too well. Next, we had Lightning Warp. Again, it's not something that you should play on a minor, right? So it looks pretty cool, actually, but it was really bad. It did not scale very well at all, so that was also a D tier. Then we had Manabond. Now, yeah, I don't even know how to explain this. You should never do this, okay? Just someone basically was like, hey man, try Manabond. And then I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. And then they're like, no, try Manabond. And then after like 10 times and numerous donations, I actually gave in and tried Manabond because everybody has a price, right? All right, anyways. So Purifying Flames and was also quite bad. Now, again, it has no projectile tag. It is a physical spell. We're not really scaling any sort of physical damage, so that's probably why it was so bad. Now, that's pretty much it for the D tier. And those are ones that I could not recommend. Even if you want to play some sort of hipster build, absolutely don't play these skills. They're horrible. Next, I guess we have the C tier, which is like definitely playable, but not recommended. So we have Stormblast Mine. Now, the cool thing about Stormblast Mine is that because it's already a mine, you can actually basically get another support on it, a fifth support instead of having to use Blast Chain. But the problem with it is that it has really bad clear, and even the single target was surprisingly weak. I guess it just doesn't really scale too well into the end game. So that's one that was considered basically a like playable, but really not great. All right, again, also not a projectile. Next, we had Rolling Magma. Now, Rolling Magma was actually not completely horrible. The biggest problem with it would be your clear. As you can see, it has like these little tiny projectiles that kind of just hop around all over the place. And yeah, it kind of looks funky, but realistically, the damage was not all that amazing. Mostly probably due to the fact that when these projectiles bounce, like they have to actually target properly, and they're pretty slow in terms of how fast the projectiles themselves moves. So I would not recommend Rolling Magma either. However, I guess maybe if you slap on GNP, it could have decent clear, but again, I don't see why you wouldn't just use something else. So there's that. Next, we had one which was surprisingly disappointing, which was Ice Spear. Now, I was expecting Ice Spear to do some of the highest possible DPS in the entire setup of all the different gems, because, you know, it's Ice Spear, right? It's known to be a very high single target skill. It was really bad. Now, I'm not sure why it was so bad, because it does have a projectile tag, which means it can benefit from things like Sniper's Mark, and also, you know, it's a cold skill, which means it benefits from Annihilating Light and all that. It doesn't need to be converted, and it has decent flat damage. You can see 1,000 to 1,600, so 2,600, so 1,300 average. It's not bad at all. I think the reason why it felt so bad is because the second form with the 600% critical strike chance, we don't benefit from that because we're already crit capped due to the fact that we're an Inquisitor from pretty much just existing. So that's kind of why I think it felt so bad. We weren't able to basically do anything with that crit. Not to mention, out of all the ones that I tested, it's pretty much the one with the absolute worst clear speed. So definitely stay away from that one as well. All right, next we have Firestorm. Now, I was actually kind of surprised about Firestorm. It looks really cool. Like, it looks like you're basically raining fire from above. And now visual clarity is definitely a bit of a problem with this setup. But the damage was not completely horrible, especially considering the fact that it's not a projectile, which means we weren't able to leverage our curse and our flame wall. And it was still doing some pretty big chunks of damage. And this was all tested on Maven. It's one that you could play if you want to do some sort of hipster build. And I'm sure that you can actually play around Firestorm and scale it in a better way than with just generic, you know, minor tree. But it's definitely not one that I would recommend if your goal is to try to get the best possible experience. Because yes, it looks pretty fun. It looks pretty funky, but again, all you're really getting is negative FPS. Right? All you're doing is killing your computer. So next was Arc. Now, the problem with Arc is that it's not very good for single target. Now, this is a known fact that Arc has a lacking amount of single target. Pretty much the only way that Arc has ever been really good for single target is with Archmage, but those times are basically gone. Maybe we'll see a return with Conduit in the upcoming league, but that's another story. But yeah, Arc just did not really have the damage. It looked like it was basically tickling Maven, like tickling. Every little hit was just tickling her, and it didn't seem to have that sort of ramp up that some of the other skills had. Now, it's definitely playable, and in terms of mapping, like, it probably would be one of the best possible skills, because we get a lot of mind throwing speed, and of course, Arc has built-in chains, right? Chains 9 times. So I think it would be quite good for mapping, and because we're, again, only scaling generic, you know, PoE, generic nodes on the tree and generic actual building of the character. Technically, let's say you wanted to play Eye of Winter for bossing, you could totally interchange Arc at any given point for your mapping experience, and as long as the damage is good, your clear is going to be better. However, then again, I believe that there are some skills that are even better in terms of clear and are also going to benefit from having better single target. So Arc is, again, like a C tier for me. Definitely not one that I would recommend. Okay, then we have two that were a little bit surprising. The first one was Wave of Conviction. Now, Wave of Conviction is a skill which is physical, so we had to convert it. So I converted the damage, the remaining of the damage, using Phantasmal, which is going to convert some of it to cold, and then the node on the tree. So using all that, I was basically 100% converted to fire, or to cold and fire. And because it's generic damage, again, the scaling on the tree, that was perfectly fine. It was actually a bit of a letdown. Now, the reason for that is because if you read the actual the actual skill itself, it says only one wave of conviction can be active at a time. So what that means essentially is that whenever a wave of conviction pops up, the moment the second mine blows up and another wave of conviction goes out, the first wave of conviction pretty much gets deleted, right? Because you can only have one active at a time, pretty much. So it gets into a situation where it doesn't quite have the same capabilities as it probably would have otherwise. I'm not sure though. Overall, it didn't feel awful, and it would definitely be playable both in maps and in a bossing scenario. But I'm putting it in like the B tier, as in not recommended, but definitely getting to the point where it's definitely playable, just not great. All right, now other than that, there was also Spark. Now this one was actually really surprising to me. I was expecting Spark to do quite well in this scenario, because I mean Spark has pretty insane coverage. Now I think the biggest problem with Spark is the fact that we weren't scaling any projectile pierce. I only had a single pierce, which should be enough for single target. But also, I wasn't really scaling any sort of projectile speed on the build via clusters or anything like that. And I think Spark really just needs that duration and that actual projectile speed. Now, the problem with going Spark on this build is that because we are so strapped for points, because we have to make our way all the way down here in order to get suppression capped, right, especially on a budget. Now, of course, later on in the league, you'll be able to drop this as you get better and better suppression on your gear. But early on, you don't really have a choice but to go down here if you want to be spell suppression. And spell suppression is something that I absolutely think is mandatory, especially for softcore, because we don't scale tons of defensive mechanics like block and spell block, and I really enjoy spell suppression on a character. But anyways, so because we're not going with clusters, we're not scaling the pierce, we're not scaling the projectile speed, we're not scaling the duration of the projectiles, it kind of felt a little bit lackluster. Again, the damage was okay, and it would definitely be really good for clearing. You know, you do get quite a few projectiles, and this is of course without the helmet enchants or any sort of projectile speed or anything like that. So it could definitely be playable, but mostly I think for mapping, for bossing, it's definitely one of the weaker ones. But again, I say weaker ones, but in terms of like, it's still like a B tier, which is not bad at all. So that's kind of where Spark was sitting. Now I do think that with proper investment, if you were to throw in clusters, it could be definitely amongst the absolute best in terms of bossing DPS, but then you would have to give up something else. And because there's really nothing else that you can give up, looking at the tree at the moment, you just have to give up the entirety of this downside at the bottom here, get 2 large clusters, get 4 mediums, right? And now, yeah, of course, you'd be doing a bunch of damage, but you'd also be significantly squishier. So I don't think it's worth it, which is why it's in the B tier. Okay, next we have the A tier. Now, the A tier is a little bit interesting because they're all quite good, and some of them were surprisingly good. And it all starts with Blazing Salvo. Blazing Salvo was an A tier skill. It actually did a lot of damage, but the thing about Blazing Salvo is that it's actually a little bit different than the scaling of, say, Eye of Winter, because you are going to need AoE on the tree. And this is why I consider it to be slightly subpar compared to Eye of Winter, but for mapping, Blazing Salvo does seem to edge out Eye of Winter a little bit due to the projectiles pretty much just going faster, right? The projectiles on Eye of Winter don't actually move at that incredible speed, but you do have to consider that Eye of Winter is a cold skill, which means it freezes everything it touches, which is definitely a very nice quality of life change that you would be losing for Blazing Salvo. Now, for those who actually want to play Blazing Salvo, there's not much of a change that you need to do to the tree. All that you need to do is grab Amplify and also Arcane Expanse. Now, once you have these 2 AoE clusters, and you don't need this last one, I believe, just these 2 nodes and these 3 nodes, you're basically good to go to play Blazing Salvo. Now, the reason for that is because Blazing Salvo throws out a lot of projectiles, like a lot of them, as you can see here, right? And this is, of course, without GMP. Now, the problem with this is that it throws them out in sort of a cone, and each of the projectiles is kind of too small to actually each hit the boss. So you need to scale a little bit of AoE, which would probably not be necessary if we were Sabo and getting the AoE from Sabo, because we're Inquisitor, we don't get any AoE scaling. We need to scale a tiny bit of AoE on the tree in order to get the actual proper overlap for Blazing Salvo to really dish out some serious DPS. Now, the downside is, of course, you need to waste 5 nodes on the tree, which you would not have to waste otherwise if you're playing something like Eye of Winter. So, in my opinion, it's just not worth, and you're also playing a fire skill. So, I mean, I don't see why you'd ever go Blazing Salvo over Eye of Winter personally, and it also did slightly less damage. Next was Creeping Frost. Now, Creeping Frost was also in the same situation as Blazing Salvo, that you did need to actually scale the AoE. So once again, you would have to get the AoE nodes over here and over here in order to get enough AoE to make Creeping Frost actually properly overlap. Now, another thing about Creeping Frost, which is actually kind of interesting, is you scale it slightly differently. Now, if you look at the actual the way that you actually scale it, instead of going with trap and mine damage, which is what we were doing for pretty much all the testing so far of every single thing that I've talked about, except for Blazing Salvo, which was using GMP, right? Because you do want to have that massive, that massive amount of projectiles, because they can overlap, which is pretty awesome. When it came to the actual skill of, of Creeping Frost, it was a little bit different. You actually want to scale it with multiple projectiles. So you could either go GMP, which is looking like this. Now the problem with this is that it would feel really, really good for mapping. The projectiles are extremely fast. They leave some pretty dead, some cold ground, which is actually going to slow everything, right? And it's an action speed slow, so it's really, really good. And then it just has really insane clear. Now the issue with that is that greater multiple projectiles throws the projectiles in an actual cone. Now this is really bad for bossing because it means that you need to scale a significant amount of actual projectile or AoE in order to get all of them to overlap. So the way that we fix this is actually to use Greater Volley. Now Greater Volley throws them in a straight line instead, and as you can see, it's much more easy. The projectiles are much less spread, right? They actually kind of converge much better on a single enemy. Now I tried this without any scaling of AoE on the tree, and it did not feel all that great. It felt like the shotgunning potential wasn't quite there. Now, after that, what I did is I threw on AoE, this AoE, and this AoE. And of course, there might be some more efficient ways of getting AoE on the build. I'm not saying these are your only options, but this is kind of what I did just to do it very quickly for testing purposes. It actually started dealing pretty significant damage as soon as I got these 5 AoE nodes. Actually, I would say it was pretty comparable to Eye of Winter, but again, because you lose those 5 nodes due to needing to scale AoE, I don't really think it's particularly worth it. However, what I do think that you could do is potentially consider Eye of Winter as your actual bossing build, where you're going to be using this for bosses, and then whenever you actually go map, you could throw in a Creeping Frost and just change your trap and mine damage to greater multiple projectiles, and you will definitely see a pretty large increase in speed. Especially if you're playing with like shield charge and all that. Now I don't know how the damage would feel like at that point if you were to cut out significant amount of damage, but Creeping Frost was definitely an A tier in my book. But remember, Greater Volley and a little bit of AoE is required to play it. Alright, next we have Fireball. Now this is a skill that I actually built a few leagues ago, Fireball Miner, and I was actually the first person in the entire league to kill Uber Elder with Fireball Mines. And Fireball Mines is back. Now, the thing about Fireball is that you don't benefit from the Ignite, you don't benefit from the Scorch. A lot of people are telling me, hey, use the Threshold Jewel. You don't benefit from it because we're an Inquisitor, which means resistances are always just considered 0 anyways. We can't go past that, can't go up. It's always 0 as long as we're critting. So because of that, Fireball basically is just a plug-and-play type of skill. So you could basically have Eye of Winter, right? You plug in Fireball, and all of a sudden, you're just going to be using Fireball. With your actual trap and mine damage. Now, it's a skill that doesn't have great coverage, and it's also a fire-based skill, but in terms of how much hit damage it actually does, it is very comparable to Eye of Winter. Now, the problem is, yes, it is comparable in damage, but it's a fire skill, and it has no coverage whatsoever. So even, for example, on Maven, when it came to the ad phase, it kind of struggled, because it wasn't always aiming for the actual brain, so it wasn't... It was kind of a painful experience. Now, however, for mapping, you could throw in greater multiple projectile, and you would have a very good time mapping, as Fireball hits like an absolute truck, and it has very, very good coverage with GMP. The downside is, of course, you have to gem swap. Now, the upside is you don't have to change anything on the tree for Fireball at all. Nothing. You don't have to scale any AoE, you don't have to scale any fire nodes. It's just plug and play and you're good to go. So if you've been looking to play Fireball, it's something that you could do. Next was Freezing Pulse. Sort of the same situation where essentially it's plug and play. It's the exact same thing as Eye of Winter. This actually was really good. Freezing Pulse was actually pretty much the same as Eye of Winter in terms of damage. Maybe like slightly less. And you don't have to change anything else on the build. You don't have to actually Scale any sort of pierce, because as you can see, Freezing Pulse gives you projectiles pierce all targets. You don't have to scale any source of chain or anything like that. So it is really, really nice. And for mapping, it's also quite good. Now, what you could do when it comes to Freezing Pulse, again, is use GMP for mapping, because I believe they removed the threshold jewel, which allowed us to get multiple projectiles before. So as you can see, this is some pretty incredible coverage. It's going to be hitting pretty much the entire screen, freezing everything. It's going to be an absolute blast. So Freezing Pulse is definitely an option if you're looking, if you just really like the look of the skill, or if you just think that, you know, that's what you'd rather go for instead of Eye of Winter. There's literally nothing that actually differs on the build. Everything is the exact same, other than mapping is going to require GMP. And then when it comes to endgame boss fight, you'll probably want to throw in your trap and mine damage to do more single target damage. Now, this is not going to be required on actual like maps, or sorry, bosses in maps. You're not going to need to do that. GMP is going to do plenty of damage, but I'm talking about like actual endgame encounters, you know, Maven, Uber Elder, Uber bosses, etc. You'll definitely want to be removing GMP for that. But yeah, Freezing Pulse was definitely a bit of a surprise to me with how good it was. Okay, and finally, the one that was actually the closest to Eye of Winter in terms of damage was Ball Lightning. Now, Ball Lightning, however, is a little bit different. For those who have missed Ball Lightning, the days of Ball Lightning Saboteur from back in Harvest, I believe I made that build. It was a very, very solid build. You can actually play Ball Lightning again, and it feels quite good. So the thing about Ball Lightning, though, is that it scales a little bit differently. Now, Ball Lightning only throws out one projectile, so I would highly recommend getting the Helmet enchant for the additional projectile like really quickly to help with your clear. But of course, you're probably just going to be throwing in GMP anyways for clearing maps, and that is going to feel quite good. As you can see, it has quite decent coverage, and because we're no longer using slower projectiles when it comes to mapping, the balls go out quite quickly, and they'll be, you know, it's like a ball of death, basically. They'll just absolutely annihilate everything. So Ball Lightning is very much playable. Now, the difference here for Ball Lightning is that we're not actually going to use Trap and Mine damage, because the way that Ball Lightning hits is that it can hit the same target multiple times. I believe it's up to like 11 times or something, maybe 9. I don't remember exactly. But the way that you need to scale Ball Lightning in order for the same projectile to hit the same enemy multiple times is that you need to scale both the AoE and the projectile speed negatively. So the way that we do that for best single target is that we're going to throw in slower projectile instead of trap and mine damage. This is going to make our ball travel slower, which means it's going to be able to zap the same target multiple times. So that's why we do that. Now, another thing is that the anoint is actually going to change. Now, the anoint that I have on this POB is a very cheap anoint, super, super friendly for solo self-found for day one. The most expensive thing here is a black oil, which is typically like a chaos or two. 50% elemental damage is just pretty insane for what it does. But when it comes to Ball Lightning, you're actually going to want this one right here, Adjacent Animosity. And the reason for that is because of the reduced projectile speed. Again, the best way to scale Ball Lightning damage is through negative projectile. So reduce projectile speed, because it's going to make the ball hit the target multiple times. And then again, when it comes to Ball Lightning, however, you will need to scale a tiny bit of AoE. So I personally just grabbed these 2 nodes here and these 3 nodes there, and I was good to go with that. Maybe you could actually even drop these two over here. You'd really just have to look at the POB and look at the actual radius on Ball Lightning to see if, like, what the threshold is to give you an additional radius on the skill. But it was actually very much comparable in terms of damage to Eye of Winter. Matter of fact, in some instances, it almost felt like it was better. And it's a little bit less clunky to play, because Eye of Winter does get the projectiles continuously gain damage up to 200% more damage by the time they dissipate, which is incredible for damage. It's like literally just giving you 4 additional support gems on your build, just from the fact that your actual skill is traveling at further distance. That's really insane. The downside, however, is that you need to place your mines strategically, and the projectiles don't move that quickly, which means if the boss blinks or something like that, you could basically throw all your traps down, then detonate them, then you think you're about to literally one-shot the boss, and then they blink or they move out of the projectiles, and all of a sudden, well, you just basically wasted all of that time. Ball Lightning doesn't have that issue. It just does damage as soon as you put it down. So that's something that you might want to consider. When it comes to Ball Lightning, let's say the map device was the boss, you'd probably throw your mines around, like right here, so slightly in front of the boss, so the projectile goes through the boss and it's hitting the boss multiple times as it's traveling through it and outside of it. When it comes to Eye of Winter, however, it's a little bit different. You want to place your projectiles around here. So as you can see, the projectile needs to go a significantly longer distance in order to reach the target. So in some endgame encounters, this can be very, very annoying, especially if you're, trying to get the maximum DPS output with all of your debuffs and all that stuff. You're putting all this stuff down, right? And then you go ahead, place all your mines, and you're like, all right, I'm about to do a ton of damage. And then Maven just blinks, and well, you just spent, 10 seconds of your life, and you gotta go again, essentially. So it is something that you absolutely can consider if you're a fan of Ball Lightning. Now, personally, in my opinion, Eye of Winter is the absolute best, is the crown spell for the actual build. And the reason for that is because it's cold, so it freezes everything. It has a ton of projectiles, so with a single pierce on the build, it's going to feel pretty damn okay for mapping. And of course, when you go with triple pierce, which is what we do on the budget PoB, right? We get 3 pierces over here. It's going to feel absolutely fantastic for literally like deli maps and stuff like that. The projectiles are going to go through everything. And of course, this 200% more damage by the time they dissipate is also a massive, massive damage multiplier that you get for absolutely free, just from the fact that, well, you're placing your mines in the proper space. So that's pretty much it for all of the different spells that I tested and how they felt and how to scale them differently. So if any of them, basically look better than Eye of Winter to you specifically, those are the ones that I personally tested. So hopefully this video was insightful. I did say that it was going to be short, and it's the complete opposite of that. It's quite long, so apologies for that, but hopefully you guys enjoyed all of my testing and the results of it so far. Look in the timestamps below if you want to see each specific skill once more. Otherwise, that'll be Matthew signing out. Before that, however, I do want to say a massive thank you to my supporters. So the 3 Alexes, Skady, Bearded8, Brandon, Gustavo, Tim, Domosame, Desu, Miss, Jarl, Loophole, Mercury, Nake, Patrick, Rescroll, Bert, as well as Rocky, Solmok, The Great Master, Thomas Mass, Maestro, Nailed, Ven, Bitizen, Nectarion, Noi, Zethion, and Larsis. Again, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.